Do you all know this flower? What flower is it? It's a lotus. In Pali, pundarikam, because it's a white lotus. Pali, the language of the Buddha, has many words for lotus, similar Sanskrit. And paduma is more like any lotus. Upala can apply to the blue lotus. The paduma can also be specifically the red one. Pundarika is the white lotus. And this is a local one. It's in our pond. Two ladies on retreat have gone there and plucked it. I'm quite impressed that we even have lotus still growing. It was very dry. Sometimes this pond is more like a dustpan, but we are lucky that it's still growing. Dr. Gamini had a professional putting them in. I don't think lotus is natural in Australia. There's water lily, but we wanted some real lotus, and he had it planted. And for a few years, nothing ever happened. And then just before we had Lumpur Liam coming, I think the day or so before Lumpur Liam's arrival, and suddenly someone saw the first lotus coming through across the surface of the pond. Is there anything special about the lotus? Is there any particular meaning in Buddhism? Is it just the same like lilies or
purity coming through the mud?
Exactly. It's a very Buddhist flower, the lotus. I mean, often they are next to the Buddha. Often the Buddha is sitting on a lotus throne. I think the other one is doing that maybe. Or one is not doing that. Often Buddha statues are represented sitting, so to speak, on a lotus. They say that the Bodhisattva, when he was born and he walked the first 7 steps, that these lotus flowers appeared and he stepped on lotus. And they often put next to the Buddha. And as you mentioned, one symbolism of the lotus flower is purity. There's a Gatha in Dhammapada, just like in a rubbish heap in the rainy season, when you get a big puddle, then out of that rubbish heap of discarded waste, a lotus can grow, and it comes out fragrant and delightful for the mind. Although it grows in a ditch where people throw rubbish, and then it gets flooded in the rainy season. So it's a very dirty place. It's nothing inspiring. It's not like an alpine clear lake. So there's this muddy ditch or huge puddle or something. But nevertheless, if you later smell the fragrance of the lotus, it's beautiful. There's no waste smell or anything. So it's a symbol for the purity of the mind. Although we are born in this world, although we are born in a very impure body, we are attached to a very impure and not very fragrant body. And that is why people have to use all these artificial fragrances to conceal the natural odor of the body, because it's not attractive. It's actually quite funny that human beings are using the excretions of animals as perfumes to make their own body supposedly smelling nicer. Musk, for example, excretion from that ox to smell nice, really amusing. And so we are born in an impure body, and we are born in a very impure and sometimes even evil world. And I noticed quite a few The people who have qualities of compassion and kindness and a sense for justice and injustice, they are often very distraught when we get the news, what's happening, whether it's the recent atrocities happening in Gaza, whether it's the war in Ukraine. And sometimes you may feel really desperate because our means on stopping that are very limited. Sometimes we have some opportunities to whatever protest in non-violent means against war and against hunger and against other crimes, but there's obviously limited what we can do. And even if we try our best, there's usually still war around if we live in the human world. In our time and age, when the human lifespan is 100 years, and we can't expect too much. But if we witness these atrocities, and unfortunately nowadays they are really rubbed into our faces, so to speak. You get that constantly on the news, social media, sharing the latest atrocity story, and then the heart can sink and become embittered or hopeless. This lotus, this is a simile, a symbol that our heart can rise above the world. Our heart can rise above all these impurities. Our heart can be purified from the defilements. Now, the Buddha even compared himself, referring to himself as a Tathagata, that he has escaped from this world, that he has been released from this world, that he is unfettered from this world, and that his mind is no longer limited, that this mind has become unrestricted by all worldly phenomena, just like a lotus rises above the water in purity. I'm not sure whether everyone is aware. Some people may be thinking, I think I was thinking that earlier, that the lotus flower is floating on the water. But that is not the case. They actually are rooted in the ground at the bottom of the lake. And in the rainy season, when the water level, particularly in India and tropical countries, it can go up very rapidly, and then they have to just grow. But they're actually growing in the mud. This is what the guy did, paid by Dr. Dhammashiha, planting these seeds in the mud of our pond. And it took a while, and they first have to develop in the mud. Now, this is kind of the lowest level. And then they come into the water, and then they are surrounded by the water. And they're not yet flowering. They're not flowering in the water. Now they have to push upwards, 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 until they reach the surface of the water. And once the lotus manages to breach the surface of the water, to rise above the water, then it can unfold. And then from the effect of the sun, this beautiful flower will open up and flower. This is a lotus before it's flowering. So the Buddha used that as similes for the process of mental development, of bhavana, of meditation, and how we can gradually develop and cultivate, so that we get out of the mud through the water, pushing further up, until we come above the surface, and then with the light of wisdom, the lotus can flower. And a symbol of complete enlightenment, freedom, gone beyond the mud, gone even beyond the water. When the Buddha was newly enlightened and Brahma Sampati invited him to start teaching, You may be aware the Buddha was first reluctant because he realized there's not that many people who want to hear about giving up sensuality and overcoming defilements and letting go of attachments. And he anticipated that it will not be an easy task. And then Dhammasiha encouraged the Buddha to use the Buddha Chakku, that is the psychic faculty of the Buddha, to look at the world. The Buddha was quite newly enlightened, so he hadn't played around with that. He wasn't interested after enlightenment to immediately try out all his psychic powers. He was just enjoying the bliss of enlightenment in deep samadhi. But when prompted by Dhammasiha, he used his unique Buddha eye, and he could see that there are beings in this world with different strength in their spiritual faculties. And some upper rajaka jatika. Now, upper means little, only a little bit. Rajo, that is the dust of the world. Imagine India in the hot season, even here, we have dust everywhere. Akhi is the eye. Jatika is born. There are those who are born with only little dust in their eyes. Now that is the lotus, which are, say, already growing in the water, maybe even close to the surface. And if he teaches them, then they will be able to fully break free and to open up, to flower, to attain enlightenment, freedom, release from all the dust of the world. Now others are still stuck in the mud, and then even the Buddha can't really help them. And then maybe you can achieve that they get enough faith that they maybe make some good karma at least. But some beings, when they are still in the mud, so to speak, they have the potential. They're also lotuses. Every human being has that the potential. Every being at all has that potential over many lifetimes at least to attain full release, enlightenment. But when the faculties are very weak and the defilements are strong, it's like being in the mud still. And then the teaching of the Buddha wouldn't really reach them, they wouldn't be able to absorb it. But the ones already going higher, they can get it. And for the benefit of those who can get it, the Buddha decided to spend the rest of his life in a very hard work of teaching. And he gave that simile also for anyone, any disciple of a Buddha who attains freedom from defilements, end of dukkha, like the lotus coming out and being unsullied by the world. That's another very powerful simile. I'm not sure whether you're all aware. There's a very special quality in the lotus flower, also in the leaves. Trying to demonstrate that. I once read that they had done even a scientific investigation, and I forgot the details of the chemistry, but the surface of these leaves is very unique, and water just doesn't absorb, it doesn't stick. Can you actually see that? It is moving almost like when you see that on YouTube. Please don't try that. Mercury is quite poisonous. When people on YouTube are using these drops of mercury, and how the flopper is very similar. This you can do, this is completely harmless. It's just a lotus leaf and water. Can you see that? I wonder whether that comes out on YouTube, probably not. It's fascinating, even if the water separates. And they go together again. And you see how different it's on the carpet. This is gone. This is totally dry. There's no sign that there was any water. Padumangva tuyena alippamano in Pali. Paduma is lotus in general. Tuya is a poetic term for water, and alippamano is not to stick, not to adhere, not to cling. This was a simile for anupadana, the opposite of upadana, the opposite of attachment, clinging, grasping, getting smeared by sensuality. Sometimes in Pali there are words which express how the mind is smeared by sensuality, how sensuality and craving and so on stick to the mind like a glue, or like some slime or something. It's not like have you ever worked with glue? In my case, if I work with glue, it tends not to stick where I want to have it to stick. Instead, it ends up sticking to my fingers and anywhere. You fiddle around with the glue. Super glue is very quick. And so the opposite. Just runs off like water off a duck's back. And that is a quality of the enlightened mind. The mind that has abandoned kilesas and has abandoned attachments and craving. And the six senses, the experience in the six senses, the external, internal six senses, and the consciousness arising based on that, the mind just doesn't stick to any of that anymore. As long as the released person is still alive and walking around with the body, the opposite, they continue experiencing that. They even will have still feelings. And if they are sick, they will still have a painful feeling. But their mind doesn't stick to it anymore. If I have a painful feeling, or you probably know that it's more like this. Just goes deep into the fabric immediately, like you take a tissue, put a little bit of water. Can we do that like with a lotus? Having the water drop running around? No way, no. Completely soaked. So this is how your mind shouldn't be. When the pain comes, when the liking comes, when the disliking comes, when you see the atrocities happening and you become depressed or embittered or angry, now remember another beautiful lotus. I love playing around with it. Forgive me. It's fascinating. Just the way it bubbles around. It doesn't stick just words, and it separates and come together again. Just like the guys playing with mercury on YouTube. But this isn't completely harmless, just water. So this is what we try to train our minds. The next time you're really upset, remember that. And it's nothing very valuable. You can have a little bit of piece of lotus leaf with you when you get upset, and just get some water out, play around, and remember this is how the mind should be operating. Just allow it to run off. Now often we have the different idea that there should be no water, there should be no rain. It shouldn't rain on me, I shouldn't be bothered by water. This is just a metaphor. I shouldn't get any painful feelings. I shouldn't get people criticizing me, insulting me, writing bad things about me on the internet and so on. But you can't prevent these things. Sometimes your body does get sick, and then you may have pain conditions, even chronic. Sometimes people may put something wacky up. and share something about you which is not true or whatever, or put a bad review on whatever you published there, or dislike your last post. And so the aim is not that all these unpleasant things never happen. This is a hopeless quest. If you try to live your life only having pleasant feelings, it will just drive you nuts. You will never achieve that. And even the guys, whether it's Elon or Bezos or even the billionaires, do you think they can achieve that with 100 billion plus, that they only have pleasant feelings? That no one is ever saying something they don't want to hear? That they can get all their businesses done? That their body never gets sick? No, it's unachievable. No one claims it's easy to train your mind until it is so capable, like the lotus leaf, that the water just doesn't stick at all. No one claims that it's easy, but it is possible. And there are many, many thousands and thousands since the Buddha started sharing his teaching who have achieved that. There's no one in this human world who has ever achieved that he only has got pleasant feeling and only has got people around them who they really like and so on. Impossible. But this one can be done. The mind can be trained until it's like that. And you see something and it just runs off. You hear something, you think something, you remember something. And it doesn't traumatize you. It doesn't make you upset. It doesn't make you hankering after it. It doesn't make you liking and disliking it. Because the mind is like these raincoats. If you have a new raincoat, or if you put this water repellent stuff on your shoes and so on, you have a similar effect. It just rolls off. So we have to train our mind to become like that. There's also a simile for third jhana. For the third jhana. That's a simile of the lotus when it is still fully immersed in the water. Because if the lotus is still under the surface and is obviously completely surrounded by water. And this is in third jhana, how the mind is completely surrounded, suffused, and completely filled with rapture and bliss. Or in this case, actually, no longer rapture, it's only bliss, it's only sukha. It's no longer moving. The first jhana is a simile like a bather, or the apprentice of a person who is professionally bathing people. When they prepare soap, or they are kneading the soap, they would use some powder and then they put water until you have got this kind of soap, smeary mixture. And this is quite a strong active process. So first jhana is much coarser still. But just like this soap is completely pervaded by water, so the body and mind are completely pervaded by rapture and bliss in first jhana. The second jhana, the simile is a pond which has got no external kind of water sources, but has got its spring right at the bottom. So it doesn't depend on precipitation from outside. Now, this is a simile that your mind in samadhi is content in itself. The source of the water, the source of the joy and rapture and happiness is inside. And you don't need nice food and exciting videos and exciting computer games and great holidays and cruises and all the other things. We constantly try to go out and get our happiness from external experience. And this beautiful simile of the second jhana, now this is a pond which has got a spring right at the bottom. So the water comes right into the lake. It doesn't need anything from outside. No, but there's still movement. The spring is still kind of pushing the water up there. As if you imagine a very still pond and the lotus growing there and completely surrounded by water. Now that's a simile for third jhana. Now the pure bliss and mental happiness. No longer physical rapture, but only mental happiness. So, any other comments? Were you all familiar with that, or was it educational? On YouTube I always click educational, that is the best criterion that I can find there. So I hope it was edifying and educational what you heard. We haven't programmed the camera yet. Now it could actually go much closer, and then if I had already programmed that, I could just push a button and then show the YouTube camera as well. But if you couldn't see it properly, maybe you feel inspired to get the lotus leaf yourself and play around with a drop of water. It's really interesting how it looks like. You can make a good video and maybe put it on YouTube, showing visually how the lotus plant doesn't absorb the water. Look at this carpet all messed around. This is our mind, soaking up everything. The tiniest little thing, someone says just one word to you, one sentence, and like this, soaking into the mind and festering and resentment and remembering it 10 years later what they said to me. This is much better. Just gone. If you wish, you can even play around with it. It's like this drop of water, and you can just, even if you do remember it, you just think what they said, and it doesn't stick.